What's up, ladies and gents? It is Wednesday, January 21st, 2026. And if you live in the state of New York and you're a 10th grade student, or perhaps you're doing a retake, you might be taking the Global History and Geography Regents exam tomorrow, Thursday the 22nd. So if you are new to my channel, please go back and check out. I've got a bunch of videos on the multiple choice section, the CRQ section, and the enduring issues essay. What I thought I would do today in this last minute cram session, if you will, before the test, is go over some tips and strategies for how to write the enduring issues essay. Okay, so this is kind of a tough task because it is definitely going to assess your knowledge of a lot of world history topics, and you have to also be pretty good at critical thinking and reading comprehension. So what I'm going to do is review the August 2025 Enduring Issues task. Okay, I'm going to go through the documents. I'm going to talk about what to do with the documents before the essay writing begins. Okay, but if you don't know anything about this essay, an enduring issue is like a long-lasting problem or important historical topic that's been affecting people since like day one. Okay, these are big, broad things like disease or the spread of disease, conflict and war, imperialism, scarcity of resources. Okay, in the description below when the live stream is over, I will post a list of common enduring issues that pop up on the Regents that I often give my own students. But if you check out some of my older enduring issues videos, that list and the link to that list is already in the description for those older videos. Okay, so to take a look at the task here, you have to do several things with this essay. Okay, it's actually more than several, it's a lot. Okay, and I have my students write 5 paragraphs total for this essay. An introduction paragraph, which is going to be a little bit on the short side, 3 body paragraphs, and a fairly sizable conclusion paragraph. And every teacher is going to teach this a little bit differently. The way I show you how to write an enduring issues essay might be different from what your teacher showed you what to do. But I think my strategy works pretty well. And if you do what I'm about to show you, you will be successful in writing this essay. Okay, so identify and explain an enduring issue raised by this set of documents. So this is one of the hardest parts. You have to go through and read these documents and determine, okay, what is one enduring issue that's common? It doesn't have to be common in all of them, okay, but it should be common in at least, as it says here, 3 of the documents. One of the traps students often fall into is this idea that you have to write about 3 different enduring issues. No, you're picking one, which is going to be like the common theme that runs throughout your essay. Okay, that's one of the goals in our note-taking is, okay, what enduring issues can we pull from each of the documents, and then review again our lists of issues that go with each and try to find at least one that's in common in at least 3 out of the 5. If that sounds confusing, it's because it is. And when we go through the document analysis, that should make things a little bit more clear. Explain the issue using relevant evidence from at least 3 of the documents. Okay, this is why I have the kids, or my students I should say, write 3 body paragraphs. 1 body paragraph for each of the documents, and that'll take care of this, using at least 3 of the documents. So basically a document per paragraph where we talk about the details that are associated with the chosen issue. Again, this will get more clear as we do some practice. Argue that this is a significant issue that has endured, meaning continued, by showing both of these things. How the issue has affected people or has been affected by people. How the issue has continued to be an issue or has changed over time. We're going to take care of this bullet point here, how the issue has affected people, in our body paragraphs, because that's what the documents will be about, how people were affected by issues. Our conclusion paragraph is where we'll talk about continuity and change over time, meaning, okay, what have people done in any given country to stop the issue or change the issue so that it's less bad, if you will, or preferably both, in what ways has the issue still been affecting people and has not been changed? Again, this will get more clear when I show you my example conclusion paragraph. One of the key differences between a mediocre essay and a high scoring essay is whether or not students pull in a substantial amount of outside information. Okay, outside information could come in the form of like historical circumstances, like what do you know from history that helps explain how or why the history in the documents unfolded. And it could also be modern day stuff, okay? Because if you're looking to prove that an issue is enduring, you could very well talk about your own life experiences, okay, or things going on in the world today, if they're relevant to the issue. So, step one, what do? We read documents, okay? And so what I did is I already highlighted some things in document number 1 here. Let me just zoom out a little bit so you can see this a little bit better. Hang on one second. Okay, so what are we underlining or highlighting? I would recommend that you bring a highlighter to the test. Let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see this better. Because what I would encourage you to do is, as you're reading, underline or preferably highlight pieces of information that help us describe what's going on, like who, what, when, where, and why stuff. So at the top, first of all, the when, 1789, that should have been something that I highlighted down here because there's no other year mentioned in the document. There's King Louis XVI here as a person, which suggests, right, this is the time period of the late 1700s, maybe during the French Revolution. But down here specifically, 1789 is mentioned. Okay, so definitely always make sure that you're reading the summaries above the source as well as the information underneath the source, because that might provide some important information. So it's a letter from the slaves of Martinique, August 29th, 1789. So we know a little bit of the where. Okay, if you don't know anything about Martinique, it tells you. Martinique is an island in the Caribbean Sea. Feel free to go and look up a map. It's really close to Haiti. Okay, so it says here, Great General, meaning in parentheses, Governor of the colony of Martinique. We end our reflections by declaring to you that the entire nation of black slaves, united together, has a single wish, a singly desire for independence, and all the slaves with a unanimous voice send out only one cry, one clamor to reclaim the liberty they have gained through centuries of suffering and ignominious, meaning humiliating, servitude. Okay, so I highlighted a couple of things here. The where, Martinique, who, the nation of black slaves, what do they want? A desire for independence. Okay, maybe the why is because they were enslaved and they want liberty, which is a word for freedom, right? And if you have independence, you have the ability to have liberty if you choose to have it, okay? This is no longer a nation that is blinded by ignorance and that trembles at the threat of the lightest punishments. Its suffering has enlightened it and has determined it to spill to its, last drop of blood rather than support the yoke of slavery. So basically, this phrase here, last drop of blood, kind of implies that people going to fight, they'd rather fight and die for their freedom and independence rather than continue being slaves. A horrible yoke attacked by the laws, by humanity, and by all of nature, by the divinity, and by our good King Louis XVI. We hope it will be condemned by the illustrious governor. Your response, Great General, will decide our destiny and that of the colony. Response meaning, hey, will you provide us with independence and rights? We look forward to hearing back from you. This is what we want. We're going to fight for it unless you give it to us. Please send it to the parish priests who will inform us about it at the announcements at the end of Mass. We await it with the greatest impatience. Okay, so I did highlight here our good King Louis XVI because that gives us a clue that this is a person that was still in power, and it helps us understand that this is a French colony, which will help us make some notes. So now that I highlighted some of the who, what, when, where, and why, if I choose to write about this document, you might also want to write down a couple of, well, I would recommend you take these notes for every one of the documents that you read. Okay, you do have 3 hours minimum to take this exam. Okay, you could very well combine some of these facts and make yourself some notes here so you can go back and if you were going to write about this document, you'd have some coherent phrases down here. But for me personally, this is enough, highlighting or underlining some key facts. And if I choose to write about this document, I could just look at those underlines or those highlights. But what I absolutely recommend that you write down is EI. Now, what does EI stand for? EI means enduring issue. You want to put down here as many enduring issues that you can recall that pertain to this source. Okay, because again, after we're done looking at all the documents, we have to find at least one issue that's common in at least 3 out of the 5. So the more we write down now for enduring issues, the easier that task will become later. So I'm going to write down a few. When I look at this, I see the demand for rights. Part of my handwriting, I'm trying to move quickly here. I could also put a comma here and go demand, I'll just abbreviate, for independence. Okay, people have been demanding rights and or independence for a long time throughout history. This is just another example of that. I could say impact of imperialism. What is imperialism? Imperialism is this idea that one country controls or dominates over another, usually to make some money. Okay, if the French were not in Haiti, this would not be here. There would not be slavery. There would not be this demand for independence and rights. Okay, because it's the French, well, the Spanish first, and then the French that took those rights and freedoms away. So certainly that's an impact of the French, of French imperialism. I can also say conflict. Okay, people have been fighting throughout history, going back to imperialism. Imperialism has been going on forever. It's still going on. Conflict is an enduring issue that goes with this, and this document is a form of peaceful protest, and people have been protesting throughout history. Okay, so big, broad issues, sometimes problematic, sometimes not, but maybe could lead to other problems. Like protests can often lead to conflict. Okay, so write down as many as you can. These are the ones that I see. And the other thing I would recommend writing down is OI. What is OI? OI is outside information. And what I'm going to put down here is anything that I can recall that might be historical circumstances for the document, like maybe the lead up to the issuing of this protest, right? So maybe some backstory about French imperialism. Maybe I also write down any facts or details I know from class that correspond directly to the document, or anything I can think of that suggests that the people did things to stop the problem, or ways that the problem is still going on. So let me write some things down and you'll see what I mean. So I'm going to write down here, French sugar plantations. Okay, so long before this letter is issued by the slaves, the Spanish, and then the French colonized parts of the Caribbean. Okay, their initial goal, going back to like your 9th grade studies, was to obtain probably gold, but not a lot of gold to be found in the Caribbean. But you can grow certain crops in that climate. And one of the things the French did was convert a lot of the Caribbean islands into large sugar plantations that relied on African labor. I'm going to put that down here, relied on African labor. Okay, the initial plan was, okay, let's rely on Native American labor, but as you might remember, when Native Americans are dying of European diseases, the Europeans rely on the transatlantic slave trade as a source of labor, and the African people were more resistant to things like smallpox. Okay, I'm also going to put down Enlightenment as a piece of outside information, French Revolution, which are 2 more examples of historical circumstances that explain this, right? People don't start to question the status quo and demand that their natural rights be protected until people like John Locke. Okay, the French Revolution takes place in France, and what was going on would gradually diffuse across the Atlantic to the colonies, and that would inspire revolutions in the Caribbean. Okay, so good examples of outside information there that are historical circumstances for the document, and also outside information, which I do need in my essay. And I'm going to write down how the economies, I'll tell you why in a second, economies in former colonies in the Caribbean suffering because of historical reliance on cash crops. So what do I mean by this? Right, this is maybe an example of how the impact of imperialism still continues on. When the French and before them the Spanish were in the Caribbean, they forced the entire economy to be geared towards one thing: growing a cash crop. A cash crop is something you grow less for personal consumption and more about selling to other people. So if you gear your entire society around the growing of cash crops, you become reliant on it. That means you don't have your own factories. In fact, the people in the colonies were told not to make their own stuff, right? They were supposed to buy stuff from the Europeans. Well, when the Europeans go home, it's not like they can snap their fingers and have factories, right? This is what they're good at. This is what they do, okay? But if everyone grows cash crops, the price of something like sugar would go down. And if you're relying on sugar and the price of sugar is low, your economy is not going to do so well. Or what happens if the sugar plant goes bad? That means you can't export anything. The point is, a lot of these economies in the Caribbean are struggling to diversify, meaning do things other than grow cash crops. And again, this whole cash crop thing is a legacy of French involvement in that part of the world. I'm also going to write down Haitian Revolution. I forgot to do that before. Okay, because just right next to Martinique, okay, and it's an example of an effect of imperialism because it motivates people in that part of the world to rise up, okay, and it's, again, a very similar thing, so it's something I could talk about maybe in a conclusion paragraph. So this looks like a disorganized mess at the moment, right? That's because we're going to deal with this information a little bit later on. This might be information I use, again, to discuss the backstory, this kind of thing. The continuity and change information, meaning stuff that is still going on today, excluding this, of course. This could be something for the conclusion paragraph. Okay, so again, stay with me throughout the process. It'll become more clear as we go. Document 2 is a timeline. India and Pakistan, 1858, British colony. The India Act transfers power from the British East India Company, a private company that became a dominant force in India after 1757, to the British government. Okay, if you remember your history class, the British East India Company was given a lot of power by the British government to have its own army, to go to war, to own land. And due to the crumbling Mughal Empire existing, India historically, due to geographic barriers being hard to centralize in terms of authority, the East India Company starts to make some inroads. A very famous battle was fought in 1757 that gave the East India Company the right to own some land. Maybe not the right, but it gave them some land. But the East India Company messed around with Indian culture. You might remember how the sepoys, who were Indian soldiers hired by the British, they were given rifle cartridges that had either pork or cow fat, which offended the sepoys. They launch a rebellion. It doesn't succeed, but it convinces the British government that they have to have direct control over India instead of allowing the corporation to have control. That's a lot of backstory, just some general review. 1919 to 1930, we've got Gandhi and his nonviolent campaign. You might remember like the Salt March, where Gandhi's like, why are we paying British salt taxes and buying British salt? Let's just go to the Indian Ocean and make our own. Okay, which got him thrown in jail, but it made the British look like a bunch of bullies, which contributed eventually to Indian independence. Growing tension between Hindus and Muslims, partly due to British policies, which is outside information, leads to the demand for maybe two countries, one for Hindus, one for Muslims. And eventually, when independence is finally given to India after World War II, due to the British not really having the money to do this anymore, and because of the efforts of Gandhi, they don't just leave, they partition India and then leave. Okay, and you'd think that they were trying to solve a problem here by creating a country for each group that had a hard time getting along, but it led to groups on each side having to move to a new country. Like if you were a Muslim person that was living in now Hindu India, you're basically forced to leave and migrate to a new country and vice versa. And that led to a lot of tension and resentment, and thousands of people died in violence as a result of this. The two sides continued to fight with each other. They still often clash over Kashmir, which is a part of northern India. In the 1990s, that tension got even worse when both sides developed nuclear weapons. Okay, so a lot of these things probably would not have happened if the British weren't there. Maybe there wouldn't be a division. Maybe there wouldn't be as much tension between Hindus and Muslims. Okay, so what am I writing down for document 2? Let's start with enduring issues. So I'm going to put EI. I'm going to put demand for independence again. I'll put demand for IMP, or INDEP. Okay, demand for independence. I'll put conflict, right? Demand for independence. Why? That's why Gandhi led his campaign, because he wanted independence, right? Independence was the goal. Conflict, because I see conflict between Hindus and Muslims over Kashmir in this document, and conflict has been going on in a lot of places around the world, as long as humans have been around, basically. What else can we put? I'll put protest, because Gandhi used nonviolent protest to achieve his goal. And again, I'm going to put impact, I'll put IMP, of imperialism. Because again, a lot of these things in this document would not have happened if the British were not there. India was particularly special to the British. In fact, they called India the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, because India had a whole bunch of natural resources, still does, like cotton. And since there's so many people living in India, it would be a huge market for British manufactured goods coming out of the new British factories during the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so outside information. There's a lot we could say here. Okay, we could put reasons for imperialism in India. I'll put parentheses, resources / market for goods. Okay, I'll also put Sepoy Rebellion. It's not in the document, but it's a huge reason why the East India Company is forced to leave and the British government takes direct control. Okay, this would not have happened if it weren't for the Sepoy Rebellion. So maybe some historical circumstances, if you will, for all of this that I might write about in my body paragraphs. I will put down as well Britain's divide and conquer policies during the Raj. Okay, the Raj is a word we use for British-controlled India. And often the British, and they did this, a lot of European countries did this in the places they went to, figuring if they could find ways to keep the people in the colonies divided, they would not unite to try to overthrow the colonizer or the imperial nation. So to keep it nice and simple for now, oftentimes the British would favor the Muslim minority in India in order to kind of cultivate some animosity from the Hindus towards both the British but also to the Muslims, okay? And that kind of conflict would keep India divided. Gandhi desperately tried to be a nationalist to unify Indian people and not let religious differences get in the way. But those religious differences kept the Indian people from coming together for a long time to get rid of the British. Okay, and you can make the case that since they had those policies, kind of like fostering, if you will, that religious tension, maybe that's a reason for why there was a partition, maybe why they continue to fight over parts of South Asia. Maybe I'll also write down, I don't know, Salt March, some specific example of what Gandhi did as part of his nonviolent protests. Okay, and maybe I'll also put down trade policies that hurt Indian businesses. Okay, the Regents loves to throw in a document from Mr. Nehru, okay, the first Prime Minister of India. Long before he became the first Prime Minister of India, he spoke out about British taxes, which in effect made Indian products too expensive to buy, and so Indian people stopped buying Indian goods and only buying British goods, and that really hurt the Indian economy. Okay, so we've got plenty here. And notice so far already, we've got some common enduring issues. I see demand for independence in both 1 and 2. I see conflict in both 1 and 2. I see impact of imperialism in both 1 and 2. So I only need to find one more document that has at least one of these in common, and then I could technically stop and just write about the first 3 that I see that have something in common. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but that is an option for you if you're bumping up against the clock. Let's take a look at one more document together, and then we'll start taking this information and throwing it into an example essay. I won't write the full essay with you, but I'll show you one that I wrote based on some of these documents and talk about the information I included and where I included it and why I included it in that way. Some questions from the stream, feel free to ask me if you have any. I do not know what's going to be on the Regents. Us teachers are not allowed to see the test until you guys are seeing the test, believe it or not. Okay, so I have no idea. But the good thing about the Enduring Issues essay is that the format is always the same, right? It's on you. You have to find the issues in the documents or issue in the documents. The only thing that will change is the documents, okay? So document 3, Estonia broke free from Soviet occupation after 45 years. You might remember the Soviet Union, right? That was when Russia becomes communist. It lasted from 1917 to Christmas Day, 1991. Was I in kindergarten that year? First grade? First grade. I was in first grade when the Soviet Union fell. Yes, I am old. All right, so let's take a look. Estonia, if you don't know, is a Baltic state. Feel free to look up where Estonia, is on a map. Might not be the worst thing to do. Okay, but the document is from 2015, but the Soviet Union did fall long before that, so this date in particular does not help me so much. So let's see what's going on here. Perhaps more than any other country in the world, the history of the Baltic nation of Estonia is a story set to song. Okay, interesting, music. Whether under German, Danish, Swedish, or Soviet occupation, Estonians have long turned to music as a way of preserving some semblance of national identity amid foreign domination. So music is a way that they expressed their culture even when they were controlled by somebody else. The country's massive song festivals, which date back to 1869, feature a choir of roughly 20,000 to 30,000 singers and have drawn audiences of more than 100,000 people, nearly a tenth of the population. So apparently in Estonia, they're known for putting on these massive concerts. But lately, as Estonia has opened up to the world, okay, so in like 2015, I guess, the world has been opening up the country's music scene to diverse influences. So music often changes when new genres are developed. So maybe that's what they're talking about here. Estonian music, not so traditional anymore. Which raises a couple of questions. Has Estonian music lost its essence, meaning its spirit? And if so, is that something to mourn or cheer? Interesting. During the Soviet era, Estonia's song festivals included plenty of Soviet propaganda. Okay, so we're talking about the impact of imperialism now a little bit. The Soviet Union took over Estonia. Well, it's been under Russian control. Remember, Russia became the Soviet Union. The Baltic states have kind of had like a on again, off again independence, if you will. They were Estonia in particular was part of the Russian Empire for a couple hundred years, I think. I want to say from like the mid 1700s up until the end of World War I, when things changed as far as European boundaries go, and the people of the Baltics got their independence. But then when World War II starts, and the Red Army is pushing towards Germany, Stalin kind of gobbled up those territories again. So it became part of the Soviet Union and they lost their independence. So when Estonia was under Soviet rule, they're forced to push communist propaganda in the music, okay, which is a big theme from the Soviet Union time period. But they also offered Estonians an opportunity to celebrate their language and traditions. For the 1947 Song Festival, the first under the rule of the USSR, that's the Soviet Union, the composer Gustav Ernesaks, pardon my pronunciation, set an old poem to music, an old Estonian poem. Estonians defied Soviet authorities and performed the song during subsequent festivals, and it soon became something of an unofficial national anthem. So even though they're supposed to be pushing propaganda in their music, they're using music as a means of getting people to remember, I guess, their traditional culture. I guess remember what it means to be quote-unquote Estonian, right? Other music was less overly nationalistic. By writing songs ostensibly about Lenin's sayings on freedom, composers like Velho Tormes gave their music double meanings. Again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing something. The music expressed Estonians' desire for self-determination. Self-determination is another way of saying freedom, independence, the right to control yourself. So they're writing these songs and including things about Vladimir Lenin, okay, but kind of using that in a way to express the Estonians' own desire for freedom, and pointed out how the Soviet Union had failed to live up to the principles of its founders, all within the confines of communist censorship. Okay, so they're kind of using music kind of low-key to protest, I guess we could say. In the late 1980s, music was the mechanism by which Estonia split from the Soviet Union. During the, quote, singing revolution, I had never heard of this until I saw this document, kind of an interesting thing to me, I'm a big music guy. Large groups of people managed to organize for independence under the guise of gathering to sing. So it's like, okay, we're holding a concert, but really what we're doing is protesting, but we just tell people it's a concert. In June 1988, 100,000 Estonians gathered for 5 nights to sing protest songs until daybreak. Singing, again, I'm going to skip that for pronunciation's sake. At festivals is our nation's most glorious form of self-expression, wrote the activist this month. A nation who makes its revolution by singing and smiling should be a sublime example to all. The movement culminated, meaning ended, in Estonia achieving independence non-violently in 1991. So again, another form of non-violent protest in the form of song. Kind of interesting. So what are the enduring issues that we could write down here? Well, they're kind of similar, which makes life easy because technically I could stop because I'm going to see several enduring issues common in the first 3 documents. So demand, again, for independence. Right, they're demanding independence from the Soviet Union, which is the reason for these concerts with the song protests, right? The demand for rights, I guess we could say. Where do I see that in the document? Well, people are demanding self-determination, the right to rule oneself without interference. That goes along with this. I could say, again, the impact of imperialism. Because these protests would not occur unless the Soviet Union took over Estonia, right? So those protests and those songs are a direct impact or result of the Soviet Union being there. And I'll just put protest as another enduring issue. So I see all of these in our first 3 documents. So OI, outside information, what could we say here? Let's say, I'll put Baltic states, like Estonia, conquered by Stalin after World War II. Okay, you might remember that many Eastern European nations became Soviet satellite nations, or puppet states, if you will, but Estonia was directly absorbed into the Soviet Union. I'll put Russia historically. And remember, Russia became the Soviet Union. Those terms can be kind of interchangeable. Historically, has wanted access to Baltic Sea for trade. So they're not able to, when they open up access to trade on the Baltic Sea, it's going to be good for their economy, okay, which might explain why they're in Estonia in the first place. And we could also put war in Ukraine. And I'll tell you why a little bit later on. I'm also going to put down collapse of the USSR / Gorbachev and policy of glasnost. Okay, so Mikhail Gorbachev becomes the leader of the Soviet Union in 1985. He pushes this policy of glasnost, which gave Soviet people the right to freedom of speech and peaceful protest and assembly. Probably without that, there would be no massive concerts where people are protesting and demanding freedoms. Okay, so this is yet another example of a historical circumstance for these protests being possible in the first place. Okay, I suppose that about covers it. So now that we've read documents 1, 2, and 3, and we've seen the same enduring issues pop up in those documents, technically I could stop. I wouldn't recommend it, but let's say tomorrow you're bumping up against the clock and you're running out of time. Technically, you could stop here and choose one of these enduring issues, remember, not 3, choose one, and write about the same issue and how people were affected by that issue in those 3 documents that you examined. Again, if you have the time, go look at the other ones, okay? Because if you read document number 4, it's about the Iranian Revolution. This might be something you know a lot about because it kind of usually taught later in the school year, so it might be fresh in your head. And maybe you see, I don't know, impact of imperialism or protest in this document. And if you see it here as well, and you know more about this and more outside information about this, you might want to write about this one instead of document 1, which is about an island in the Caribbean that you might not know too much about. Okay, so that's why I certainly highly recommend that you look at documents 1 through 5, but for the sake of time now, we're already 36 minutes in here, I'm going to stop. Okay, so you might ask yourself now, like, all right, well, which of these enduring issues do I choose? The same ones popped up in the first 3 documents. Well, that's your first thing. Make sure it's common in 3 out of the 5. Make sure you know what the issue means, right? If you don't know what imperialism means, you should not be choosing it. And I would also recommend choosing one that you know the most outside information about. I could write a lot, personally, about imperialism throughout history. Okay, I could write about it from the point of view of the Roman Empire, even if I so choose. You can write about 9th grade information on this essay if you can recall it. So for me personally, that's going to be the one that I choose. I know a lot about imperialism historically and currently. It's in those first 3 documents, so I'm going to go for it. Okay, so that's going to be the one I choose. So let me show you now an essay that I wrote based on documents 1, 2, and 3, and we'll read through it together, and I'll tell you why this information is here. So in the introduction paragraph, I recommend that you do the following. Okay, let me show you enduring issues task one more time. Identify and explain an enduring issue raised by the set of documents. So in our introduction paragraph, we're going to take care of that first bullet point right away. I'm going to tell the reader what my issue is, thereby identifying it, and I'm going to define it right in the very beginning in my introduction paragraph to check that off. Okay, so that's what I did right away. I start my enduring issues essay the same way every single time. An enduring issue is a long-lasting or continuing problem or historical topic that has affected people over time. Okay, that's a great opener for your essay. Just tell the reader you know what an enduring issue is. Okay, it's a good way to signal that you know what you're doing right away. Here is where I am identifying the issue I'm writing about. But I'm not saying the enduring issue I'm going to be talking about in my essay is. No, I'm just writing the impact of imperialism is one example of an enduring issue. There, I identified an issue that's common in 3 of the documents, right there. Imperialism is, okay, so here's where I am defining it, is when one nation takes over or dominates over another part of the world, comma, usually for economic gain, right? To make money is the primary reason why imperialism happens. This issue has affected people in various ways, okay? What I'm doing here in my introduction paragraph is giving the reader just a little bit of a taste of why imperialism is a problem. Okay, and it's not just random things, it's information that I pulled from the first 3 documents. So here's what I put here, such as colonists being denied their independence and ability to participate in their own government, right? People were denied their independence in all 3 of those documents. Okay, so again, it's very general, it's not detailed. I would explain in my body paragraphs in detail. Colonists being forced to labor for the imperial nation. We saw that in document 1 when those African slaves were working for the French. That's the imperial nation, France. and increased ethnic or religious conflict within colonies. We saw that in document 3 when it talked or discussed the conflict between Hindus and Muslims. Okay, here's the last sentence. This is where it's a little bit confusing. I have to go back and do something in the documents that I forgot to do. Check out what I did here. Independence movements in Martinique, India, and Estonia are 3 events that demonstrate the impact of imperialism. Okay, I'm telling the reader there 3 historical events from a document that prove that imperialism is a problem. So this is not something you really have to do in your introduction paragraph. What I tell my students to do is, hey, for each one of those documents at the top, give the document a title. Sometimes at the top of a document, it'll tell you what the name of the event is, but I just named this one for myself, Independence Movement in Martinique. Document 2, what did I call that? Independence Movement in India. Document 3, Independence Movement in Estonia. Okay, I provided my own titles for these particular events, and that's why I put those 3 titles in my last sentence there. Again, you don't have to do that, but it's a good way to indicate to the reader that this issue can be proven not by just using documents 1, 2, and 3, right? That kind of sounds a little bit juvenile, right? We don't want to say independence movements, or rather documents 1, 2, and 3 show the impacts of imperialism. Instead of saying docs 1, 2, and 3, I put the actual events from those documents in my sentence. Okay, so you don't have to do that. It's just kind of a fancy way to write that I would recommend doing. So, body paragraph number 1. What am I putting here? Okay, this is where I'm discussing information from document 1, because that's the first one I'm choosing. Remember, I decided I'm writing about 1, 2, and 3. Those are the only ones I read, and we saw that there is one issue common in those 3. I'm going to be writing about information here that shows how people were affected by imperialism in that document. What else am I doing? I'm going to write about some historical circumstances that lead up to imperialism taking place. Because if I do that, I can cross off something else in my box, including relevant outside information. I take care of that if I put historical circumstances here. I'm going to put some in my conclusion paragraph too, but this might be an easy way for you to make sure you check that part of the task off. So let's take a look at what I wrote here. Topic sentence: imperialism affected the people on the Caribbean island of Martinique in several ways. Okay, this is my way of indicating to the reader that this paragraph will be about imperialism in Martinique. I start with historical circumstances, right? History should be written in a chronological order, right? So historical circumstances come before the document. I should write about those first. The French had several colonies in the Caribbean in the 18th century. That's the 1700s. I know it's confusing, with Haiti being the most famous example. These lands were primarily used to grow cash crops such as sugar on large plantations. With superior weaponry, the French compelled Native Americans to work on these plantations. However, due to many indigenous people perishing from European diseases, the French turned to African slave labor arriving via the transatlantic slave trade. Okay, so a bunch of historical circumstances explaining how/why France is there. By the late 18th century, the French Revolution had begun, and the Enlightenment ideals about liberty and equality that it hoped to bring about diffused across the Atlantic. This inspired, and here's where I get into the document itself, the nation of black slaves in Martinique to seek independence and, quote, reclaim their liberty, parentheses, Doc 1. Okay, if I'm taking information from the document, I want to indicate to the reader that I'm doing as such. So I put parentheses Doc 1 here after the first time that I mentioned something specific from the document. Do you have to do this? Technically not. You will not get points off if you don't cite the documents. But it's a good way to make sure that your grader sees that you're using the documents. I can tell you firsthand, when we grade Regents exams, we grade hundreds of them for like 2 or 3 days on end. It takes forever. There's a lot of reader burnout. So anything that you guys can do to make sure that the reader knows you're using the documents, I would do it. And this is a way to accomplish that. There's not a lot that I'm pulling from the document at this point because this is kind of a short document and a lot of the stuff down here is very wordy, right? The basic facts I highlighted up here, I kind of just condensed down into this sentence. Later, slaves across the Caribbean would rise up against the European imperial powers. Okay, more on this a little bit later, and I'll tell you why I'm including it later. So again, impacts, I wrote about historical circumstances. I wrote about the impact of imperialism from the document. What's the impact? It inspired people to rise up and get their freedom. That's what I need to talk about here. Body paragraph 2 is about people being impacted by imperialism in the next document that I chose to write about, which is about India. I start again with historical circumstances. You are not going to know as much as me. Okay, I've been teaching 10th grade for 14 out of my 16 years teaching, so I know a lot of outside information. Yours won't have as much, and that's okay. Okay, but I just want to show you some of the things that you could write about in this essay, and I think historical circumstances are a good way to, again, make sure that you include some outside information. Just a quick question from the stream here, a little ahead, but does the modern day issue have to be something from recent times? Can it be older and you just explain how it continues today? It absolutely could, okay? If you choose to write about Roman imperialism over Gaul, that would be fine, okay? Your job is to prove something is enduring, okay? So if you want to go back in time instead in something like your conclusion paragraph, by all means, okay? Good call, great, excellent question. Imperialism also has similar effects on the people of India. Another topic sentence, okay? So again, imperialism in India is going to be the subject here. The British, historical circumstances first. The British East India Company began taking control of land in India beginning as early as the mid-18th century. India was of particular interest to the British since it has an abundance of natural resources like cotton, and its large population could serve as a market for, British manufactured goods coming out of its industrial factories. Okay, this is not just random stuff. I wrote these things down during my brainstorm, right? When I put down OI stuff, I talked about factories. I talked about divide and conquer policies. I talked about British factories, why India was special. Pardon me, I have a lot of pages now with a lot of notes, but you get the idea, right? These are things that I put down in my OI brainstorm when I was looking at the documents initially. In fact, due to new trade laws, the people of India were effectively forced to buy British goods, resulting in the collapse of Indian businesses and its textile industry. So this is a good fact because even though it's outside information, it's also an impact of imperialism. Had the British not been in India, there wouldn't be a collapse of the there wouldn't be a collapse of the Indian textile industry. So that piece of information kind of serves two purposes there. The domination of the British and their cultural interference in India led to the Sepoy Rebellion. This is another impact of the British presence there, right? A rebellion, but it's also outside information, which was a failed attempt to remove British influence. One reason for its failure was that the British used a divide and conquer strategy in India, often playing favorites with the Muslims in an attempt to create resentment among the Hindus. This would effectively prevent Indian unity and a united resistance against the British. Later, Gandhi used non-violent tactics such as the Salt March to gain independence from Britain. After World War II, Britain finally granted India its independence. So there's a little information here from document 2, right? The stuff about Gandhi seeking independence is here. There's a lot of information from the document that I did not write about yet. And it's stuff I'm going to include in my conclusion paragraph. You can write about it now if you want, okay? But I like to set up my conclusion paragraph as a place where I have the students write about continuity and change over time. So I'm gonna save some of this stuff for later because I think it best suits that part of my essay. Again, I think it'll become more clear a little bit later on. I'm gonna cite document 2 here because this is a fact from the document, and that's it for body paragraph number 2. Body paragraph number 3, similar pattern here. The third document that corresponds with my enduring issue that I chose, the impact of imperialism. In the European state of Estonia, Soviet imperialism produced negative effects on the people. Historically, here's again my historical circumstances. Historically, Russia has always had an interest in acquiring lands on the Baltic Sea in order to increase trade. Despite becoming independent from Russia after World War I, the Soviet Union under Stalin reabsorbed these territories as a result of the Red Army occupying much of Eastern Europe after the defeat of Nazi Germany. So this is information that I wrote down in my initial brainstorm in my quote OI category. I just expanded upon it with my own knowledge. The people of Estonia had a proud culture that was heavily impacted by Soviet rule. Here's where I'm getting into the document itself. For example, music is very important to Estonians, and the country has had song festivals since the mid-1800s that are often attended by over 100,000 people, parentheses, doc 3, period. It's a fact from the document. I want to show the reader where I got my information from. Again, not required, but encouraged. When the Soviet Union controlled Estonia, the music changed to include communist propaganda as a way to control the thoughts of the people. It's another fact from the document that corresponds with impact of imperialism, right? If the Soviet Union was not in Estonia, they would not have had to change their music to suit the needs of the communists, right? The communists are always looking to brainwash people into thinking that communism is great, so the music had to change to include some of that propaganda. Later, music would be a means by which the Estonians would fight for their independence. So, body paragraph done. Historical circumstances, some information from the document about people being affected by the chosen enduring issue, and now I'm done. So I've done an introduction paragraph and 3 short body paragraphs. What about the conclusion? For me, the conclusion paragraph of the enduring issues essay might just be the biggest one out of all 5, okay? Because this is where I'm going to take care of this part down here. Has the issue, or how the issue has continued to be an issue, that word issue keeps coming up, right? Or has changed over time. So when I see change over time, I think the easiest way to think about this is what is done or has been done in that country to stop the issue from being a problem. Because if they're stopping the issue from being a problem, that means something has changed. So that's why I saved Indian protests for a little bit later on in the essay, okay? What about continued? Continued means, how is the issue still a problem? This is why I saved conflict over Kashmir for my conclusion paragraph, because the British made the division in India in the first place, and their continued fighting between them is something I could write about to satisfy this part of my task. And I think both of these things together make for a nice conclusion paragraph. So technically, I'm not done writing about information from my documents, okay? I've only just done a little bit so far, but it'll play a role here as well. So take a look at this big, fat conclusion paragraph. Again, yours would not look like this. It's probably not going to have the amount of outside information that mine will. But again, you want to talk about the information, again, from the documents that show how people are trying to stop the problem of imperialism, or ways that imperialism is still problematic, maybe even despite efforts to fix the issue. So take a look at what I did here. Maybe it'll become more clear. Imperialism resulted in the demands for independence and other similar effects in Martinique, India, and Estonia. The people of these nations took several steps in order to stop imperialism in their nations. So now I'm going to go back and talk about stuff or historical evidence from the 3 documents I'm writing about to show efforts to change, right? Change the issue, meaning make it less of a problem. Here we go. For example, comma, probably my favorite transitional phrase. Gandhi's use of boycotts and sit-ins contributed to India being able to obtain its independence in 1947. That is a fact from document 2. I chose not to cite the document here because I already cited document 2 in my second body paragraph, but if you want to cite the document here, by all means, do so. In addition, the people of Martinique, as well as people conquered by the French on nearby islands, such as Haiti, rose up to gain autonomy and the abolition of slavery. Okay, so that was more information from document 2, how people are rising up, right? They said in the document, and if you wanted to quote it, you could, right? They would rather spill blood than deal with slavery, right? That suggests rising up is going to happen. That's a way to change the issue from being a problem, right? If imperialism is a problem, rising up against the imperializing nation would change that problem, make it less of a problem, right? Haiti became an independent republic in the early 1800s, just a piece of outside information that corresponds. Finally, people in Estonia used music as a method of mass protest against Soviet rule. More information from a document talking about how the people or the government tried to change the issue and make it less of an issue. This was likely made possible, so here's some outside information here, and this is from our brainstorm, made possible due to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev's policy of glasnost, which gave Soviet citizens the freedom of speech and ability to protest peacefully without the fear of mass arrests. Again, outside information to support the idea and give more background from the idea in the document. Weave these things in when they make the most sense to do so. Now, in this second part of my conclusion, I'm talking about how imperialism is still a problem in these places, okay? And this could be information from the documents. It should be, if you have access to that information, but it could also include outside information. The impact of imperialism does continue in many of these places, however, period. For example, just before leaving India, Britain partitioned the region into India for Hindus, and Pakistan for Muslims. This contributed to resentment and violence as people felt the need to migrate between the newly created countries. This is information from document 2. Let me just put that back in front of you for a second, right? We talk about, or it talks about tension between Hindus and Muslims, how they divided India into 2 countries, how people by the millions moved to the country that best represented their religious beliefs. Again, information from the documents talking about continued problems, right? There's still India and Pakistan today. And again, that would not have happened, that would not have happened if it weren't for the British being there in the first place. And since those countries are still around, it's a continued issue. How else is it a continuing problem? Tensions continue to be high, as both India and Pakistan have continued to fight over Kashmir. That's also from document 2, right? Fighting over Kashmir, it's right here. So I'm putting it as a continued problem, which is a land in northern India. That's my own knowledge. In addition, both nations have successfully developed nuclear weapons, which has the whole world on edge. That's more information from a document. Again, there wouldn't be this tension and maybe nuclear competition between the 2 countries if those 2 countries didn't exist. And it's because of the British that those 2 countries exist. Otherwise, it would just be India, right? Finally, let's refer to something in document 3. This is kind of a stretch, okay? And you don't have to do this for all the documents, but do it if you can do it. Finally, while Estonia remains independent, it shares a border with Russia, which has been aggressively trying to restore its Soviet-era borders with invasions in nearby Ukraine. Okay, so the threat of a Russian or Soviet takeover has not exactly gone away in this part of the world. Every once in a while, Russia makes threats towards Estonia. It's right next to Russia, and Russia is looking for, more lands between Russia and the West as kind of like a buffer zone, which is a reason why they're invading Ukraine in the first place. I didn't get into all that here, but again, the Russian tendency to want to conquer lands on the Baltic has not disappeared, is the point I'm trying to make here. All right, so let's quickly recap what I did. Introduction paragraph, I tell the reader what enduring issue I'm writing about, how it affects people, what the issue means, historical examples that prove it's a problem, right? Without saying, oh, documents 1, 2, and 3 show the problem. No, I gave those 3 documents titles, a short body paragraph. Again, yours might be shorter than mine because I have a lot of historical background information in mine. Short body paragraphs discussing how people were affected by the issue in that document. So how people were affected by imperialism in document 1, how people were affected by imperialism in document 2, how people were affected by imperialism in document 3. Great. Conclusion paragraph, and again, your teacher might teach this a little bit differently. They might have you write about everything from document 1 all together in one paragraph. But for me, the conclusion paragraph is where we talk about what have people done to stop the problem and what is still a problem in those places. Okay, in my conclusion paragraph. So my conclusion paragraphs in my classes and for my students will be probably larger than maybe what your teacher teaches. But any way you want to do it is fine as long as the information is there. So for example, if you wanted to write about all this Estonia stuff in your Estonia body paragraph, you could. And if you did that, if you divvied up the information and redistributed it, then that just means your conclusion paragraph is going to be short, right? Maybe it's just a quick recap of the point you're trying to make in your essay. Somebody asked a question about, can you go back to the past? If you want to talk about Roman Britain or Roman Gaul in your conclusion paragraph to show that imperialism impacted people long before the documents, by all means, you could do that as well. All right, so again, when this is done, I will post a link to a list of common enduring issues that come up on the Regents, but feel free to check out my other videos on this topic. I have several about the enduring issues essay, and some of them are a little bit less off the cuff, a little bit more formal, so maybe that is better for you if I have maybe a slower pace with better handwriting, or maybe I type things out. So check those out if this was a little bit much for you, but hopefully it helped. I do have a minute if anyone has any questions before I close the stream. Does anyone want to ask something before I sign off? I'll give it a second. All right, guys. Well, no questions, but you could always drop a comment once the stream is on YouTube, and I will do my best to respond to that comment before tomorrow's Regents exam. Good luck.